Hey, everybody. Good afternoon or good morning. I am really glad you could all join us again this week. It is Thursday, August 15th. It's 1 p.m. local time, and I hope everybody is strapped in and ready for our 20 minutes or less discussion on what's happening in our North American labor markets, because we are definitely on the verge of some serious disruptions here happening over the next couple months, actually next couple weeks to next couple months. So it's really critical. You know what's going on. You've got to understand your exposure. Get strapped in. We'll try to keep these concepts simple. I am going to apologize in advance, though. This is acronym city today, and I'm going to try to use the acronyms as tastefully as possible. I think we can all agree that too many acronyms make something really hard to digest. So I'll try my best. Let me know if it was still too many or it still was hard to follow. But anyway, if this is your first time here, my name is Jason Brand. I'm the Director of Outreach and Partner Development at Supply Chain Solutions. If you haven't heard of Supply Chain Solutions, we are a full-service supply chain management company. We ship to and from over 150 countries every single year, and we literally handle every link in your supply chain. That means from origin all the way to destination. We handle a bunch of inventory management projects all across not only the US, but North America and beyond. And we've got a suite of awesome technology that's linking every piece together. We've kind of created this paper mache design of what we think is the perfect combination of visibility and transferability between departments. So it's really cool. We really have a great product that we love to give to our customers. If you haven't worked with us, you should definitely check us out. We're really excited about our capabilities right now, and especially going into 2025. So I hate even saying that because it's still summer, right? But anyway, it's coming up, and we in supply chain, we have to be thinking about 6 months ahead all of the time. So anyways, let's get the show on the road. So for today's show, really, we're going to be focusing on two major labor showdowns. And first, and I don't even want to talk about the second one until we get into it. So first, we're going to be talking about the Teamsters Canada Rail Conference, acronym number one, TCRC for short, and their contract negotiation with two rail lines. This is obviously in Canada. So you've got the Canadian National, or CN, and then you also have the Canadian Pacific Kansas City, or the CPKC. So we're going to start there. If you're feeling like we talked about this a few months ago, you would be right. We did cover this very early in the year. And that's because this has been an extremely long and drawn out process. It's been unfolding. This is kind of a bad example of a labor negotiation, quite frankly. We saw this process in probably a lot more of a heated way, I guess you could put it, with the ILWU in the past, just recently. And this one's been relatively silent, but it's been kind of picking up lately for good reason. So there are a lot of things that's happened since we talked about it last. And I really just kind of want to run through all the major dates because it really brings us to what just happened and why it's important. So we're going to go all the way back to December 31st of 2023. That is when the existing collective agreements for the Canadian Union workers and the Canadian National Rail, or CN, and then also Canadian Pacific Kansas City Rail, CPKC, reminder, both expired. Now, what's unique about this is, generally speaking, both of those agreements don't expire at the same time. That makes a challenging negotiation process. So after months of failed negotiations and really some aggressively heating up rhetoric, on May 9th of this year, the Canadian federal government suspended the union's right to strike. So what they did is they said, hey, we need somebody to take a deeper dive into this before you can strike on both railroads. So what they did is they referred the case over to CIRB, C-I-R-B. There's another acronym, Canada Industrial Relations Board. We're going to just be saying CIRB for short. That one will stand out, which is going to be very nice. But they needed to make the determination if any of the rail services were essential during a strike and lockout and kind of determine what was going to be allowed. So we can move forward. Remember, that was May 9th. Now we'll move to May 22nd. This was the originally proposed date that the union was planning on striking. CIRB was, or remember, that's Canada's Industrial Relations Board. They delayed that action. And actually, it took CIRB up until the end of just last week to come up with a ruling on this matter, which is just completely wild. But let's move forward. Let's go to June 7th. So June 7th, a proposal was put forth by the Teamsters Union in Canada to stagger these negotiations between the two railroads. So The goal here was versus trying to tackle both of these agreements at once, they wanted to have an extension on one and focus on another. This proposal was almost immediately shot down by the CN rail line and the CPKC line. And what this really was signaling is it was a big bet from the rail lines that CURB was going to be ruling in their favor. Yet when we fast forward again to August 9th, or just last week, it turns out that CURB ruled that no rail services need to be maintained during a strike or lockout. And in doing so, they really set the stage for a potential massive disruption. But they didn't even just say that. They went on to say that commodities transported on Canadian rails are not considered essential services because reasonable alternatives exist through long-haul trucking. That's word for word. Now, while that may be true, when you remove all of the rail service, trucking tends to get a little bit stressed, to say the very least. And that really takes us to where we are here today on the 15th. So the likeliness of a strike announcement happening literally before the end of this week is at an all-time high. The Teamsters Union in Canada did make a statement that they would not strike without at least 72 hours notice, but still, that is not a lot of notice, especially in supply chain. So if you want to make matters a little bit worse, there is still a lot of ground that's got to be covered between these sides. So to sum it up, we've got salaries, we've got work-life balance, we've got rest period. They are all getting discussed at the moment. The rail lines, CN and CPKC, they want to abolish the current pay structure for conductors and engineers specifically. They'd like to replace it with an hourly wage kind of style. They are announcing that this is really the modern way of doing things. The union on the other side has said that the pay structure proposal would mean salary cuts. They also are objecting any proposals to amend the current workplace rules regarding on-duty time and rest periods. So if you just kind of take that in for a second, what is fascinating about this negotiation is the rail lines are setting the demands. And conventionally, we've gone through a series of labor negotiations over the past 2 years. And in all of them, it has been the very opposite. And that's crazy. And if you consider another labor negotiation that's going on right now, that's the ILA on the East Coast, and you compare what the ILA is asking for, which is wild, to this kind of defending what they currently have, you kind of realize that the chance of a strike happening is very, very, very high. So you need to be prepared. You need to understand if you have exposure. And, quite frankly, you need to start preparing right away. So here's a quick risk assessment for you. If you're currently shipping into the West Coast ports of Vancouver and Prince Rupert, you're almost guaranteed to be negatively impacted by a potential strike. And that could happen as soon as next week. So the dilemma here is that both of these ports are designed around rail. They've got a huge dependence on them for overall throughput. And it's just, if a strike occurs, you will get a disruption. So in this case, if you are shipping into either of those two ports, make sure to reach out to us right away or reach out to your logistics provider, because you're going to want to explore a couple options. You're going to want to look into transloading your cargo into long-haul trucks, getting those to your destination. You could have some trouble doing that, given that's going to be the primary route that's going to be happening. So if you are having an issue there, consider draining your containers across the border. Go down south about 3 hours if you're headed into Vancouver. You want to go to... Really, your goal is to get on some of the American rails. So you're going to want to try to get loaded on the BNSF or Union Pacific Railways. Obviously, both of these are in the US, as I mentioned. Now, these are not very quick and easy switches. So if you do have containers on the water headed to those ports, you should really consider making preparations today, or at least having a backup plan in place. Given the potential strike happening here and the timeline before this potential strike, I really want to make sure we cover that first. And trust me, I'm not going to feel bad if you got to hop off and ensure you've got everything in order when it comes to product you've got currently on the water or whatever. But just give us a thumbs up. We really appreciate it. Let us know that, okay, I got to go. I got to handle this right now. So second part of the show, we just want to quick talk about what's happening with the ILA negotiation and just give you an overview of what's going on. So as a reminder, we've been talking about this weekly, but it's really been in an inch deep and a mile wide kind of depth. So I just want to kind of take a step back, remind everybody the parties involved and everything like that. So the ILA stands for the International Longshoremen's Association. They are the labor union that represents longshore workers that are primarily located in the east and Gulf coasts of the United States. But that also includes some workers that reside in Canada and also in the Bahamas. So you want to think of the jobs like dock workers, terminal workers, and just other laborers that are involved with the loading and the unloading of cargo at ports. The total number of members in the ILA is roughly 85,000. So it's a huge membership. Now, the current negotiation is primarily with the United States Maritime Alliance. That is USMX for short. They represent the shipping companies and the terminal operators that are portside. So that's kind of the who as a reminder. Now, the real question is when and what happened recently. So as of last Friday, the USMX, or the Maritime Employers, they announced they proposed a significant wage increase as well as expanded their benefits package as part of a new master contract. But this happened on Friday, and the ILA didn't even wait till Monday to respond. On Sunday, they started launching stuff out on social media, and they said, we are still very far apart when it comes to the economic issues. Essentially, the wage increases were not high enough. And they went on to say, we're so far apart, we're actually at an impasse. So that's a pretty strong signal that they are not where they need to be, especially at this point. And as a reminder, the contract expiration is coming up on September 30th, and the ILA president has made it really clear since the very beginning that if there is not an agreement signed by then, there will be no extension, there will be a strike. So September 30th is that date. As a comparison, the ILWU's contract, gosh, I should have relooked this up. I believe it was June 30th. It was the end of June, I believe, but that didn't get signed until the following spring. So that's how long they were on an extension. And so the ILA's asked to actually have a contract signed on time. It's just unprecedented, which is kind of sad, but it's unprecedented for these negotiations. So we're going to have to see how this unfolds, but I hate to laugh on a subject so disruptive, but you do have to watch this. They are, quite frankly, very far apart in what they want. And, to just be pretty frank, the ILA wants a massive wage increase. They pretty much looked at the financials during the pandemic and said, you made all this money, we want a piece of that. And unfortunately, I don't love taking the side of the shipping lines too often because it is such a interesting market that has so many frustrations for companies that are involved in it regularly. But we are in a very different place than what we were in the pandemic. And I think kind of taking a look at hindsight, what happened in a crazy wrinkle in time is not a really good bar for how wages can be increased appropriately. But just my 2 cents. I'd love to hear your opinions as well. So, in the short term, we're taking a look at our map here. You kind of consider these two labor issues happening roughly around the same time. So expect your West Coast rates to be on the rise. They are basically, you're going to have shipments that are being forced into your U.S. West Coast primarily. And that's because obviously we've got our Canadian West Coast, which is going to be the most affected by those disruptions. Then you've got your East Coast, which is looking at basically, September 30th when things are going to really light up. If you join us every other week on our Freight Market Roundup, you know that recently the West Coast rates have actually been declining. They hit a peak in the beginning of July, and they've been kind of slowly tinkering down. Given all of this on the horizon, it's likely you're probably not going to see a huge increase in rates simply because they're so unbelievably high at the moment, but you will probably see a stabilization of rates. And, just kind of looking at the silver lining here, the good news is the West Coast schedule reliability has been really good recently. It's been in the 60% range on average across all of the shipping container lines, which is great. If you look at the global average, and this is obviously a little skewed with some of the things going on, but the global average is like 15 to 17 points lower. So that's definitely a good sign. At this point, it's substantially higher than the East Coast, but these are topics we cover in our Freight Market Roundup, and there's a lot of reasons behind that as well. Anyway, I really appreciate all you guys for joining. If you do have shipments going into Canada's West Coast, it is critical you get a backup plan figured out. As I mentioned, the chance of strike is extremely high. Anyways, really appreciate you for joining. Thank you so much. Make sure you join us next week for our Freight Market Roundup. Thanks all.